studies, taking snippets, thank you, Shuli, taking snippets from the book Torah Dava. Why don't you share with everyone where we're up to, Shuli, with this book?
So we've seen part of Sefer Bereshit typeset. It looks really nice, easy to read, felt good to like hold it in the hands. And they're just making a few changes, and then they're going to typeset the whole thing so we can really get a sense of how it looks as a book. We'll just look it over once more for errors, little errors, typos, and I think then we're good to go, just about.
Right. It's what's made it complicated is it's 5 volumes, so it's not like a fat 1 volume. It's 5 volumes, but hope it makes a small contribution. And this week we're reading, as I just mentioned, the portion of Bahar. Now, generally, the last 2 portions of Leviticus, Vayikra, Hi Graham, generally they're read together, but this year was a leap year, so we're reading Bahar separately from Bechukotai. Actually, in Israel, they're 1 portion ahead of us. They're reading Bechukotai, and we'll catch up a little bit later in Bamidbar. The reason for that, by the way, is that if we remember, the last day of Passover was Shabbat. The 8th day of Passover was on Saturday, on Shabbat. But in Israel, they keep only 7 days. So interestingly enough, that was not Pesach. So we were reading about the holiday, and they were reading the next portion. So they're 1 portion ahead of us. And so we read with Parshat Bahar, which has a lot to do with the sanctification of the land of Israel. We'll talk a little bit about that next week, looking at the whole of Vayikra as a unit. We're reading the Haftorah from Jeremiah, chapter 32. If you happen to have a Bible near you, it starts chapter 32, sentence 6, or in the Bibles, as it's split by the portion of the week, it's after the portion of Bahar. I happen to be looking at the Hertz Chumash, which is still my favorite and written many, many years ago. And in the Hertz Chumash, it's on page 539. So I want to study the Haftorah because there's a beautiful midrash that I wanted to share with you. So again, I'll be speaking for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up, and I welcome your comments. I always tell people the best part of the class is not what I have to say, but listening to everyone's insight, which is so edifying and uplifting. And so Jeremiah was a prophet during the destruction of the first temple. He prophesied that the first temple would be destroyed. The first temple was destroyed in 586 before the Common Era, BCE. And actually a couple of years before that, Jeremiah, someone's calling me. I'll be right back. Give me 60 seconds. I'll be right back.
Well, then I will pop on and say for anyone who just came on, 2 items. Number 1, if you usually attend Rav Ezra's class and you're not on his email list for some reason, he's not teaching today after Rav Avi. I should also make sure Rav Avi knows that actually, because he might want to spend a little more time. Number 2 is if you're interested in coming to the HIR dinner, which is this Sunday, feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you need help registering, or anything that I can help with for that.
Vivian, do you know what hospital Ruby is at?
Ruby's in the hospital? I didn't know.
I don't know if it's
she's in the hospital
I
again?
I don't know.
She's
Rabbi,
not in the
Suggested her
hospital.
daughters.
She's not, she just goes there to get tests, then she
is
goes
not
back to
in the
Paula's house.
hospital. She is
Okay.
She's
at
with her
Paula's-
daughter
Paula's.
I see.
at
Okay,
Paula's.
That's what I thought.
At
okay,
Paula's.
okay,
Hi,
She's not in
Rabbi.
the hospital.
okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you
Rabbi,
for,
Oh,
Rabbi, I just wanted to mention, which I mentioned to the class, that Rav Ezra is not going to be teaching at 11:30. He has his son is a little under the weather, so he's going to the doctor with him. So
Okay.
just in case you shouldn't feel cut off, in case you want to go a few more minutes.
okay, thank you very much. So back to our text, and let's dedicate this to Ruby's feeling better, Refuah Shlema. If anybody speaks with her, mention that, please. So Jeremiah was the prophet of the first destruction of the first temple. And as a matter of fact, his prophecy disturbed many of the Jewish leaders. They were very upset with him, and they imprisoned him. He was thrown into a dungeon for his prophecy. And we pick it up here where Jeremiah, I would imagine, is no longer incarcerated, but it's just about the time when the temple was being destroyed. Vayomer Yirmiyahu, I'll read it in the Hebrew because the Hebrew is so beautiful. Haya devar Adonai Elai lemor. And Jeremiah said that the word of the Lord came to me saying, Hine, behold, Chanamal ben Shalom Dodcha. He had, that is, Jeremiah had an uncle by the name of Hanamel ben Shalom. Interesting name. Hanamel, the son of Shalom, was his uncle. And Jeremiah says that the word of the Lord came to me that he, ba'elecho lemor, that Hanamel was going to come to Yirmiyahu and tell him the following. Kinei lecha et sadai asher ba'anatot. He said, look, I have a field in a place in Israel called Anatot. And it's difficult for me to hold on to that field, Hanamel said, but I don't want it to pass out of the family line. And therefore, as actually our portion says, it's good for the family members, if a house is being sold, to buy the house. Because you have first rights to buy the house. Not every family member is in a position to buy one's home, but these are some of the laws that if a house is being sold, the right of redemption, so that it not pass out of the family line, is first given to a family member. So Jeremiah says that God appeared to him saying that Hanamel, his uncle, was going to be approaching him and asking Jeremiah to be a field, to buy, his field of produce, not a house, but a field. And indeed, the next sentence says, Vayavo Elai Hanamel ben Dodi. And indeed, Hanamel, my uncle, came to me, Kidvar Adonai, as the Lord had spoken. And he came, El Chatzar Hamatara. He came to a particular place, to a yard. Hamatara was like an outer yard. Vayomer Eli, and he said to me, Kinei na et sadai asher ba'anatot. Please, he says, buy the field which is Anatot asher be'eretz Binyamin. I ask you to buy this field. I'm your uncle. I must sell it. I'm giving you the first right. Ki lecha mishpat hayibusha, because you have the first right of inheritance. Ulecha hageula, and you have the first right to redeem the field. Kenelach, buy it. And the prophet says, Va'eda ki dvar Adonai hu. And I knew that this was the word of God. So let's think about what the scenario is. I mean, Israel was being besieged by the Babylonians. We all know this. The city was pierced, the walls were punctured and were thrown down 3 weeks before the 9th of Av, when the temple was burnt to the ground. And now a field is being sold. I mean, how much could that field be worth? Would anyone be interested in buying that field? This is, you would imagine that the field, maybe this is not the time because the Jews were being exiled. Who would be there? But God had told him that Hanamel, his uncle, would come to sow the field and that Jeremiah should buy the field. And so the text says, chapter 32, sentence 9, Va'etne et hasadeh. And I bought the field. Jeremiah says, Jeremiah the prophet enters into some real estate. He buys the field just before the temple was destroyed. Me'et Hanamel ben Dodi. I bought it from my uncle, Asher banatot, va'eshkalalo. And here it gets a little bit interesting. And I paid him. I paid him et hakesef, shiva shkalim basara hakasef. I paid him whatever he wanted. I paid. Va'echtov basefer, and we wrote up a contract. Va'echtom, and we signed it. Va'oed edim, and there were proper witnesses who signed the contract, who testified to the acquisition. Va'eshkol hakesef b'moznayim, and I paid the money on the balances. In other words, there was no fraud. And va'ekach et sefer hamikna, and the contract was in my hands. Now, what's fascinating about this is that in the Talmud, the writing and the signing of the contract based on this text becomes the prototype of how contracts were to be written and signed in early Jewish history, that is, post the destruction of the temple. One would imagine, should that be the model of how a contract is signed? But that became the contract. Ruby, it's good to see you. There were people expressing concern about your health, and it's just good to see you, Ruby. You're still in Paula's? Good. You look much better, Ruby. It's just good to see you. And we actually dedicated our class that you should have a full recovery, Ruby. So that's fascinating. It's fascinating that this becomes the model contract. And then it says, Vayachtov basefa ve'echtom. I guess here we lose out being on Zoom, because I think if we had it in front of us, everyone, the beauty of the verbiage would be better seen. I wrote the contract and signed it. And I took the contract, et hatum, the signed contract, hamitzvah b'chukim v'tagalui. I took the contract, ba'etain et hasefer hamigna el Baruch ben Neriah. And I wanted to make sure, since Jerusalem was being destroyed, that we could retain this contract. And I gave it to Baruch, a man by the name of Baruch, blessed, ben Neriah, composite of Ner Kah, the light of God, ben Masya, le'inei Hanamel Dodi. And so I, in the presence of my uncle Hanamel, I gave this contract to Baruch, u'leineho edim ha'kotvim b'sefer hamikna, and in the presence of the witnesses, and in the presence of other Jews, le'inei kol ha'yudim ha'yoshvim b'chatza matara, v'atzaveh et Baruch le'ineihem le'mor, and we told Baruch, who apparently was the secretary, saying to them, Ko amar Adonai tzvaot Elohei Yisrael, thus says the Lord God, the host of Israel, Lo koach et hasfarim ha'eleh, take this contract, et sefer hamikna hazeh, ve'et hachatum, take this contract, which testifies that I bought this field from Anatot. Take it. It's been signed. The Et Sefer Hagalui Hazeh. Take it. It's an open book. You can see the contract. Unitatem b'chli chores, and place it in pottery. Place it in. Put them in an earthen vessel. Leman yamdu yamim rabim, so that they should be around for a long time. So he signs the contract and he gives it to Baruch ben Neriah. That's what he does. And then this very famous sentence, he then adds, Kicho Omar Adonai Tzvaot, because thus says the Lord of hosts, Elohei Yisrael. Mind you, let's remember that Jerusalem and the temple were being destroyed. And then Jeremiah says, because this is what the Lord of hosts has proclaimed. Od yiknu vatim v'sadot u'chramim ba'aretz hazot. You can find this on the walls of many, many buildings and kibbutzim in Israel. Od is always the word against all odds. Like when Joseph said, Ha'od avichai, is my father still alive, when he revealed himself to his brothers. Or we sing, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel are alive. Od avinu chai. Od is always against everything that's rational, against everything that is logical. Od, even as the temple in Jerusalem were being destroyed 586 BCE, against everything which is normal. Yiknu vatim. In the future, houses will be bought, v'sadot, and fields will be bought, uchramim, and vineyards, ba'aretz hazot, in this land. You can imagine this sentence in the 40s, and in 1948, these were words that were sung in so many places in Israel when the Jews were reestablishing their sovereignty in the state of Israel, became into existence. Od yiknu. And he's saying that here I am, I have purchased this land in the darkest of times, and yet I've done so, even though I'm soon to be exiled with the rest of the Jewish people as he was. It's being placed, the contract in an earthen vessel. O Jiknu, I know that we are going to return. And the truth of the matter is, it's God saying that, Jeremiah, if you have heeded my wishes and you're buying land against all odds, O Jiknu, then it's very, very clear. Jeremiah says, declaring that there is no doubt that there is going to be a redemption. Now, so he buys the land. Now I want to read to you the Hertz commentary. He buys the land, and the text is going to go on and say, it implies and it says, he buys the land, and suddenly he sees that the siege of Jerusalem has reached its zenith. And he sees that the temple, literally, with all of Jerusalem, is being destroyed. And at that point, I'm reading from Rabbi Hertz, a wave of doubt surges over Jeremiah. He is himself overwhelmed by the darkness that is enveloping his people. From the court of the guard, I guess he was still in prison when Hanamel came to visit him, and he signed the document. When Hanamel asked him to buy the land, he's still in prison, he's in the courtyard. But from that courtyard, he could see the works of the besiegers. And within the city, famine and pestilence were raging. He therefore turns to God and seeks assurance for the faith and confidence which he has sought to implant in others by a symbolic action of purchase. It wasn't so symbolic, it was real. He sees Jerusalem is going up in smoke, And he's beginning to doubt, what's the sense? Why have I bought this? And with this, I'd like to tell you a story. This is a story about my teacher's, Rabbi Joseph Dov Soloveitchik's wife, Tonya Soloveitchik. Tonya Soloveitchik died in the early 60s. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, who never remarried, he lived another 30 years. He died, I believe it was in 1993. She died in the early, I think 63. I'm not exactly certain, but it was right about then. And she was afflicted with a terrible, terrible cancer. And in the end, Tonya Soloveitchik died. I received once a letter from her. It's a precious letter, and I can't find it, and I'm so upset. But I'll keep looking for that letter. She was a genius in her own right, and they had a romantic marriage. Rabbi Soloveitchik always spoke about her in the most romantic terms. And this is what Rabbi Soloveitchik said at his wife's funeral. He took out the Bible and he read what we have just read. We read Jeremiah chapter 32. And then he based himself on a midrashic, on a rabbinic reading. And the rabbinic reading is slightly different, as rabbis often do. And the way it is read in rabbinic literature is that God tells Jeremiah that the temple is to be destroyed. And Jeremiah understands that God's word is true, but he decides that he is going to stand near the temple and not move. And he felt very, very deeply that as long as he would stand near the temple, he would breathe life into the temple and nothing at all could happen. He would breathe life, literally, vayipach bapav. He would breathe life into the temple and the temple would forever remain as long as he would be there. And then the rabbinic reading of the text that I just read to you, I read the literal, but the rabbis always embellish and shape it slightly differently. But then God tells him that Hanamel is going to want to sell a field and he should buy the field in Anatot. And what does he do? Since God tells him to buy the field, he leaves the area of the temple. He leaves the Bet HaMikdash. He's no longer standing there. And he leaves the temple and he meets his uncle Hanamel and they sign the contract. And there are the witnesses and they give it to Baruch ben Neriah, etc., etc., as the king said and the king and Ayub Brina said, etc., and so forth. So he signs it. And then he comes back to the temple and the temple is destroyed. Let's follow what the Midrash is saying. 1, prophecy that the temple was going to be destroyed. 2, Jeremiah understands that what God's prophecy is true. He was a prophet of God, but he feels he could hold it off. As long as he's going to be near the temple could never be destroyed. 3, God tells him to buy a field in Anatot from his uncle. 4, he leaves the temple to buy the field. 5, he does it in a very real way, which becomes the model of how contracts were signed into the future. 6, he turns around to come back to Jerusalem. And as he's looking at Jerusalem, there's a description of how he sees the fire literally, a flame burning down the temple. That is the way the Midrash understands this story. And then Rabbi Soloveitchik continued and he said the following. he said this. He said, my wife, Tonya, was my temple. She was my temple. My deepest confidences I shared with her. There's nothing that I held back from her, nothing that she held back from me. We were so very, very close. She was my temple. And when the doctors came and told me that she had terminal cancer, like Jeremiah of old, I knew that what the doctors were saying was real. I knew that she had terminal cancer and she would die. But then he said, like Jeremiah of old, I believe that as long as I would be at my wife's bedside in the hospital, the way Jeremiah was at the side of the temple, as long as I would be there, nothing could happen to my wife, Tonya. My love for her was so great, I breathed breath into her. She could not die. And I happened to have been in Rabbi Soloveitchik's classes during those years. And he used to shuttle in from Boston, the Eastern Shuttle in those days, the shuttle still works. He would come in Tuesday morning and he would teach Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But he didn't come in. For weeks and weeks, he didn't come in. And he described at the funeral how he sat at his wife's side. He prayed there. He slept there. They had given him an extra bed. He studied there. He conducted his business there, his business as the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the school. He didn't move like Jeremiah did not move from the temple. He did not move from his wife's bedside. And at that point, he received the call. This is what he's telling, I am told, at his wife's funeral. He certainly said it soon after. If he didn't say it at the funeral, he said it at the Shloshim. And at that point, he received the call from Dr. Belkin. Dr. Belkin, Samuel Belkin, was the president of Yeshiva University. And Dr. Belkin proceeds to tell Rabbi Soloveitchik that they had received an unbelievable gift from Gurus. Some of you may know the name Gurus. He was a very great benefactor. There are those who are still recipients of the kindness of the Grus Foundation. And the Grus Foundation had specifically donated money so that the salaries of the rabbis of the Rosh Yeshiva teaching at YU would be increased. And Rabbi Soloveitchik notified him it was a $1 million donation. And $1 million in those days was much more than $1 million today. Today, it's also a lot, but then it was a super a lot. And it was $1 million donation, and they were going to have a dedication of the gift in New York at Yeshiva University. And he asked Dr. Belkin if he could come to New York, to fly to New York. And Rabbi Soloveitchik said, I can't go. I can't go. I can't leave my wife's bedside. You know, Dr. Belkin, they were very close. My wife has cancer. It's terminal. And I must be at her bedside. As long as I'm here, I feel I can help her. And Dr. Belkin called back a few times and said, maybe you could speak to the doctors. If the doctors tell you it's okay, you'll fly in and you'll fly back the same day. It's only a couple of hours. And the doctors assured Rabbi Soloveitchik that everything was okay. She was safe today, safe tomorrow. And so out of commitment to Yeshiva University and to the gift that was given to his colleagues, he decides that he's going to fly to New York. He shuttles into New York, and he is part and parcel of the ceremony. And it's a joyous celebration. The same day he gets back on the plane, he flies back to Boston. And as he steps foot off the plane, he's notified that his wife had died. And he says he felt very, very similar to Jeremiah the prophet. Of course, he would never think he's a Jeremiah, as great as Rabbi Soloveitchik is. that as long as Jeremiah stayed very, very close to the Bet HaMikdash, as long as he was close to the Bet HaMikdash, nothing could happen. But when he went, even for a good reason, the good reason was to buy this field to show we still believe Odik Nuvatim. By the time Jeremiah comes back, the temple had been destroyed. And here Rabbi Soloveitchik comes back and it was gone. Shuli, if you can put up the Dvar Torah on the screen, I'd like to just bring this to a close by sharing with you the way it was written, and also a similar story related to my father, which I think is important to put in context. Because look, the reality is Rabbi Soloveitchik could have stayed there for another day, another week, another month, but if Tonya Soloveitchik had terminal cancer, she was going to die, even with him being present, just as the temple was going to be destroyed, even if Jeremiah was still standing there. But it's still the idea, the power that we have of being near people in their moments of greatest need. Are you able to put it up, Shuli, or is it too
Yeah,
complicated?
no, I walked
to do?
away for a second and I wasn't sure if you had asked me to. Let me see what I can.
Okay, I think I can get it, but I want to read it the way I wrote it, and then we'll open it up. I have it in front of me, Shuli. If you can get it, fine. Oh, there it is. You got it. So let's take a look at it. In this Haftorah, can you make it larger, or is that possible, Shuli, or it's impossible? Okay. In the Haftorah, follow me. Jeremiah, who prophesied the destruction of the first temple, leaves Jerusalem and travels to Anatot to buy a field from his cousin Hanamel. By the time he returns, Jerusalem is destroyed. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik suggests that when God told Jeremiah the temple was doomed, Jeremiah knew, we're now on the 5th line, Jeremiah knew the word of God was true, but his love for the temple was so great that he felt that by remaining nearby, he would infuse his very life, his very spirit, his very breath into the temple. Thank you for pointing to the place. Then, Shuli's pointing to the place. Thank you, Shuli. As an act of faith, Jeremiah left to buy a field, a statement that even in the midst of doom, one must always believe that the Jewish people will prevail. While well-intentioned, Jeremiah disconnected himself from the temple when he left Jerusalem, and the temple was destroyed. Some rabbis maintain that Jerusalem could never have been destroyed had Jeremiah remained in the city. This is a midrash. Several people have told me that Rabbi Soloveitchik related this teaching to the death of his wife, Tonya. The Rav often spoke of his wife in the most romantic terms. She was his bayit, his home, his temple. And when the doctors told the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, that Tonya was terminally ill, he knew the prognosis was bleak. But like Jeremiah, he felt he would always remain near and infuse part of his being into her. And so it was. For months, Rabbi Soloveitchik remained at his wife's side. He prayed, studied, and conducted his business there until one day, when Tonya urged him to travel to New York to finalize a contribution made by a generous philanthropist to increase the salaries of the rabbis teaching at Yeshiva University, Rabbi Soloveitchik's yeshiva, the Rav hesitated. But in the end, the doctors assured him that Tonya was not in danger that day. He flew to New York and successfully secured the gift. But as he stepped from the plane in Boston, he was notified that Tonya had lapsed into a coma. Entering his wife's hospital room, the Rav found her unconscious. A short time later, Tonya Soloveitchik died. There actually are different stories, whether he was notified when he stepped foot, or notified that she was gone, or notified she was unconscious, as we wrote here. Now, some words from my heart. Since the death of my revered father, Rabbi Soloveitchik's story resonates more than ever. Sitting with my siblings at Abba's father's bedside for several weeks as he passed from this world to the next, we shared memories, Torah, songs. Exhausted, we had been there day and night for days. I was encouraged to finally get a good night's sleep in the apartment I was staying at next door. My father lived in the most modest quarters. There was just hardly any room. And so I was sleeping on the floor, and my sister Tova said, go next door. And there was Ariel Wiener parents had an apartment there, and she was kind enough to allow us to use it. And I didn't want to leave, but I was so exhausted. So for good reason, I went. And awakened in the middle of the night, it was my sister Tova who called that my father was failing. I rushed, literally. I just rushed out to his side. I lied down in my clothes. I just rushed out, but I arrived a moment too late. I'd missed my Holy Father's last breath. And then I write, I do not bemoan not being there, but as Rabbi Soloveitchik taught by example, treasure those moments when sitting at my father's side, we breathed every belabored breath with him. It was a holy time, a time of Kedusha, and we were all there. Such is the power of remaining close. There's a power. And I didn't use the word Kedusha, holiness, if I can face everyone for a moment. I didn't use the term holiness in a light way. I do believe that the moments of dying are moments that a lot of people shy away from. That is the bereaved, the closest of kin. But that's precisely the moment, if one can, not everyone can, one should try to remain close. The inevitable will occur, but these are very holy moments. And then I continued, and I'll just read it surely while facing everyone. The message is that while nothing is forever, staying close to the places and people we love helps infuse them with life. This closeness is needed to maintain the everlasting connection between Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, and the land of Israel. This is the message of Jeremiah and is one of the messages of the Jubilee year, because every 50 years, land is returned to the original owner. So, when I first wrote this, I didn't include the personal anecdote about my father. And Gillian Steinberg pointed out to me, it could really be understood. There are people who stay close, and life is life. Life goes on. And what are you arguing that because Rabbi Soloveitchik left his wife's bedside, that's why his wife died? That is, of course, not the argument that I'm making. That's absurd. And so I felt it was important to include what literally happened with me. My sisters actually were lying in my father's bed. He had a big bed, but I had, gone across the way. And Tova asked me, often has asked me, do I feel bad that I missed my father's last breath? And my response is, I'm very at peace within my own soul. This was God's will. I don't think I did anything terrible. If I had a choice, I wish I would have stayed, but doing what was probably best because we thought he could make it through the night is okay. The idea is not to say that as long as one there, that the one who is not well or dying is going to live forever. That's not the concept. The concept is that staying close makes a very, very big difference. Just staying close, even if one says nothing. Toby often tells me that when I was stricken with, I'm being too personal today, but just a story. I was stricken, as you know, with a heart attack at the age of 42 at a Soviet jury demonstration. In the end, I had to go through serious bypass surgery. And Toby tells me that David Mann of blessed memory came to the hospital and sat with her through the surgery. This is now many years ago. The surgery was nothing close to what it is today, but I'm indebted to my doctors for saving my life. I often call their fingers, Mark Greenberg and Avi Meirav, the fingers of God. And Toby often says, David didn't say a word to me, but just being near me was made a very, very big difference. And I'm told that even people who've been intubated, and if they're blessed with being extubated, that they say that the sense of hearing is the last sense that goes. And when speaking to somebody who is unconscious, you never know, maybe the person hears. There are those who have awakened and actually have some recall of what was said to them during these moments. That was the purpose of this Devar Torah. The purpose of the Devar Torah is that even in the text, in the literal text, he sells the field. It's a little bit different in the literal text. He doesn't seem to go Tanatot, but the uncle comes to him in the prison courtyard. But however it is in the Midrash, he leaves, he comes back. And when he comes back, that's the concept. He breathed life into the temple, and then he sees that the temple has been destroyed. And actually, in the last sentences of the Haftorah, he says, Ve'ata, Jeremiah turns to God and he says, and you, Amarta Elai Adonai Elohim, God, you told me, you told me to buy the field. You told me to make sure that this contract is going to be a bona fide contract. And yeah, when I return, the city has been destroyed. The Kasdim, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, they destroyed the city. And then the last sentence, Vayhi Dvar Adonai el Yirmiyahu Lemor, and this is the last sentence of this magnificent Haftorah. The Lord turns to Jeremiah and says, Hinei ani Adonai Elohei kol basar. Jeremiah, I am God, the God of all human beings. Hamimeni yipalei kol davar. It's one of the great answers and realities of history. Because Jeremiah had said, there's nothing too wondrous for you. And Jeremiah responds, there's nothing too hard for you, God. That God says, is anything too wondrous for God? Against all odds, the city will be rebuilt, the temple will be rebuilt, and Zion will be reclaimed. And that's precisely what we've been blessed to see in our own generation. So I want to really encourage you, if you have a chance, to sit back and read Jeremiah 32. And Shuli, if you're able to send to everybody just a copy of the Dvar Torah, so you'll have it at your side and perhaps refer to it. I want to stop here and get your thoughts on this, your input on this.
All right, let me take a look for some hands. I saw Rita first, then I saw Lance. Tova, wait, let me make a list. Sorry. Hold on. I'm going to put a list in for everyone. I said Rita, Lance, Tova, Ellen, Bev. Did I miss anyone? Keep your hand up if I missed you. Okay, let's start with Rita.
If I'm looking down, that means I'm taking notes on what you're saying and teaching. Please, Rita.
You're muted. You're muted, Rita. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you. There you are.
Yeah. Okay. I so understood everything you said, Rabbi, because with this pandemic, my husband died from the virus. I mean, okay, he was along in years, and it's something you accept, but I could not go to the hospital. They wouldn't let me there because he had the virus. And that, I think that was really about the worst thing that I felt in the whole episode. And so I just understood what you were saying. It
I
wasn't
so-
just me that felt that way, and others would also in a similar kind of thing.
I so appreciate your sharing that personal story, and I have memories of your husband. When I call, I still hear his voice on the answering
Mhm.
machine. So, thank you, Rita.
Thank you.
Shuli, who's
Sorry, next was Lance.
Rav Avi, am I correct? But all the stories you have told are exactly the same story as Ima Shalom,
please help me with that. What do
the
you
oven
mean?
of Aknai, Ima
Yes.
Shalom's brother, Rabban Gamliel.
Yes.
She attempts to prevent
Yes.
her husband, and her husband actually escapes from what she wants him to do. And at that moment, Rabban Gamliel dies. And
Right.
it's exactly the same thing, isn't it?
Right. No, I think so. There's also the story of King David, that as long as he was learning Torah, his life couldn't be taken. And yeah, so yeah. I just found I actually, if I sound a little kind of emotionally like, this, I've seen this and wrote it up, but it just, I do remember very clearly, I was so moved by this story. I actually told it at the dedication of the Bayit in 1980. I just, the message was, let's stay close to this place and infuse it in as much Kedushan. That's just a building, so much more important to stay near people. Thank you, Lance.
All
Anyone
right,
else?
next is Tova.
Yeah. Sometimes we know that sometimes it's hard for a person to take their last breath when a loved one is near them because they just don't want to hurt them. They don't want to leave them. And they need really permission to take that last breath.
Yeah, it's very
And
true.
sometimes just stepping away is a kindness.
No, I appreciate thank you. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And sometimes people should be given those, right?
That permission.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, like, right. When one deals with matters of the human condition and expressing love has, what's right in one particular way doesn't work in other ways. So Tova, I hear you, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. We also felt my father lingered for so long. We thought maybe he needed a quiet time. Maybe he didn't want us to suffer with him. Or maybe it's maybe it's a very private moment. Maybe it's a very private moment. Not sure.
Hard to take that step when you're going to leave a grieving loved one.
Yeah, but I also want to point out that the power of this story is the eternality of Jerusalem. That's the real power. Yes, when Jeremiah comes back, the temple was destroyed, or the Rav comes back, but the legacy continued. And in the case of Zion, there was a rebirth. That's what the last sentences are about, where Jeremiah proclaims, you told me to buy the field, and now the city is destroyed. And God says, is anything too wondrous? life is short, but life is long, and let's see what happens. Let's see what unfolds. And in the end, as we've said a few times already, Zion was rededicated and reborn. And as a matter of fact, there is a next generation. The way of the world is people live, people die, and there's a next generation that continues the legacy.
Ellen is next. Oh, and then, sorry, there's Ellen and then Bev, and then I see Ruby's hands. So Ellen, Bev, and Ruby.
I think you're getting to the part that spoke to me almost as much as sitting and staying with a person, and that is that in both of those cases, it was also a reaffirmation of the fact that the Jewish people will go on. That that in buying the land and signing that contract and saying, I want it preserved in that jar, and in going and getting the gift that would enable the yeshiva to continue and thrive, they were both reaffirming the belief that this is eternal. People die, but
Yes.
perhaps this is the eternal part.
No, I appreciate that. I'm just thinking about in the Psalms, Psalm 137, there is the beautiful psalm of how Jews were sitting at the rivers of Babylon after the destruction, and they raise their hand and they say, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, even then, that eternality. I think I once shared with you that I found a very beautiful rabbinic teaching that it's not just we who take the oath, God takes the oath. God says, I'll not forget Jerusalem, even though it's been destroyed now. I'll not forget it. And I think it's, I think what you're saying, Ellen, is so important. This discussion, which sounds like a downer, should really be an upper. It's an upper because it deals with Zait Nishmiyayish, don't give up, Yiyah Tov. It's going to be good. We're going to come back, and that occurred. It occurred in Israel, and it occurs in not only in Soloveitchik's life, his teachings, but in everyone's life. Everybody leaves an imprint. Michtam de David. Everyone leaves some kind of imprint. Everyone. Ruby, did you want to say something? What was it?
I think it was
Bev?
Bev, and then Ruby.
I think of Menachem Begin, blessed memory, and his wife, that he did not want to leave her bedside.
Yes.
He did, because he was prevailed upon. And when he came back,
You know what? You're absolutely right. Thank you.
and he never emerged from that.
Wow.
He didn't. That was the end of his public appearances and his,
Yeah.
Of course, I have great admiration for Menachem Begin. And this is just another one of his strengths that that he felt that he was that he wasn't there, and I don't know whether he punished himself or he aligned himself or what he did, but I felt it was really an expression of his caring for her, and
Right.
and that story, and sometimes in the case of Judy, I was with her all the time in the hospital. Every time she opened her eyes, I was there, day or night, over the years. But when she died, she was in another room. Would she have lived had I been there? She went to the bathroom, and that was the end. So you never know how much life you pass on. And but I've come to realize that was her time.
Right. Right. Ruby, thank you for sharing that personal and the Bagan story. That's clear that when he came back, his
Gone.
wife was gone. What was her, anybody remember her
Paula?
name?
Was her name Paula? No.
Oh, yeah.
Estelle,
Estelle,
do you
you're
know?
muted.
It was
Her name was
Aliza. We called
Oh,
her Allah.
yes, yes,
Allah,
yes.
Bagan.
I knew you would know, Estelle. Thank you.
Oh,
Ruby, thank you, Bev.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we all agree how difficult it is to stay at the bedside of someone who's dying, and of course we can always then say, well, this was the hand of God. This was out of our control. But I'm also reminded of what also is now does occur amongst the elderly and infirm, that there are trusts set up where close relatives or friends, whomever, will have a say in making decisions if you're physically unable to make these decisions and it's close to death. And is that even in a way harder, because here you got the human being having to step in and make these decisions, as opposed to what we first discussed where God was making the decision. So it's not that one is to replace the other, but it just reminded me that the second also does occur all the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruby. Right. They say that if you write a will, you're guaranteed very, very long life. So I hope in allowing for this discussion.
Good
many years
morning,
of-
everyone. Ari Fold here. I am right in front of the site of the new.
I hope many years will be added. So is there anyone else want to finish off? Estelle?
I can say
May I,
something.
Julie?
That was somebody on a phone. Was that Judy? Was that you?
Yes,
No,
it was Judy.
I started
So
to say
Judy
something.
Stieglitz wants to say something, and also Estelle.
Okay,
Okay, well, first of all, I
Go
just want
ahead,
to say
Judy.
thank you for the great Shiora, Rabavi. And this reminds me of thanking you so much for all the years, through my many illnesses that you've been there with me. And another thing that I've learned from this Shior is the importance of my responsibility as the recipient of many people, including yourself, who have been there with me day in, night, all kinds of hours. And when each of these important, significant others are there, I just need to be ever grateful to them and to show them, including yourself, my utmost gratitude, including gratitude to Hashem.
Right. Thank you, Judy. But, it's very reciprocal. I thank you for everything very, very much. And Estelle? Thank
Yeah.
you, Judy.
This is, I hadn't even brought up the topic, but something that I sort of never talk about. But when Eddie got sick, I was there every day, and somehow this particular day, I was there all day, and Wilma came, and it was July, and it never gets cold in July. And I was all day, and he was somehow very quiet. And I remember saying to Wilma, this was about 2:00 in the morning. I said, maybe we should go home and put on some pants, because I was wearing shorts. Maybe you should go home and put on some pants. And we thought that was a good idea, because we'd only be gone about an hour. And I went home, and change into slacks. And I got a call from the Hebrew home saying that Eli had gone. And
Wow.
it was just the hour that I was gone, he was
Mhm.
gone.
Mhm.
It was, and of course, Jonathan, who was on his way, never made it, in time. So, I guess Eli didn't want to have us around
Yeah,
when he had to go.
right.
So, I guess this is the way of life, or death, or I don't know, or a person's inner being.
Right. Good, thank you. I think we're gonna stop here. And Shuli, would you be able to send out, are you
I
able to
have to
send out?
see if I have, well, while everyone is on, I think I'm gonna write all their names in so I see who I have and who I don't. Okay?
Okay. Okay. Is there anybody else who wants to have the last word after I see Arnie's not on again. So I was
So
worried.
where's
Arnie has physical therapy at this time, so he's not going to be able to join for a bit, it
Okay.
seems like. Roseanne, are you able to drop your email address into the chat or tell it to me out loud?
I'll tell it out loud. It's rseelen@aol.com. And my
Mhm.
last name is spelled Seelen.
Okay, great.
So I'm not the only AOL customer.
Almost.
There are few of us left. By the way,
Very
I do
few.
have one little tiny thing to say.
Please.
Through all the difficulties that have existed for me over the last years, my community, my synagogue, have been the greatest support I've received.
Oh, that's
They
great.
have helped me without even knowing it through some very, very difficult times. And my synagogue and the people in it are my place of refuge.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I know that you're downtown and it's the 6th.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You have a wonderful rabbi there. So
Yes, we do. We
We
do. A
do.
young new rabbi, very good, talented.
yeah, we used to do programs with them when there were Chovevei rabbis at Stanton Street, which is not far away, right? Not too far. Stanton's a little deeper down. Good. Fern, enjoy the
I
day
think
today.
I have everybody, and I will send you that Devar Torah. If you don't receive something from me in the next half an hour and you would like the Devar Torah, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm Shuli, SHULI, at thebayit.org. You can find me on the Shul website. If you were able to find your way to this Zoom, I bet you can find me.
And if you have any thoughts on grammar, something's wrong, this is the last opportunity we have to change it. So, all right. So, I got to tell you a very interesting story about this, that, when you write a book, they have on the inside, it says that you can't reproduce any part of this book. It's illegal to reproduce it. Remember they used to have those mattresses? Johnny Carson used to talk about this. He always made me laugh, Johnny Carson. Whenever he came out, Johnny Carson, he always tripped. And every time he tripped, it was funny. I don't know why. It was something about him. But he was once going off in comedy about, do you remember they used to have these tags under a mattress? If you take this tag off, I think they threatened your life or something. It was like, a tremendous tremendous penalty. How did I get to this? What did I say right before Shuli? Anybody remember?
It was going to be another story.
But what was it? What was I saying? I don't want to sound like a real.
Johnny Carson tripped?
No, before Johnny
About
Carson.
the book, about the book.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
the not to copy it.
So I wrote back to them and I said, I have a different text. And I wrote up a text. Do you have the language of the text, Julie? Basically, the text said,
I can find it.
if you want to Xerox any part of this book, please Xerox it, send it, spread it as much as you can. just the opposite. That was always my dream that it would say something like that. But then they wrote back and said that that is illegal. You can't do that for some reason. And do you have what did we write?
So we wrote, we had already, this is already a little softer than what you had said. Please feel free to copy and distribute portions of this book while keeping in mind that the works quoted herein may be copyrighted. Okay.
And they didn't accept that.
No, they said, in any lawsuit for copyright infringement, it is standard to sue. Well, this was because it was the publisher, both the lawyer and the author. This sentence invites copying and not only does not protect the publisher, but increases liability by encouraging copying. You should revert to the standard format, or we should not publish the book.
Ooh, that's big stuff.
Right. That's the way it goes. Like anyone's, these are not bestsellers, Deborah.
But if it's for an educational purpose, I think they're free to copy it.
That's true. That's true. That's implicit. Yeah, I asked about that. That's implicit. If it's for educational purposes, you are allowed to.
But as long as you give the credit to the author.
Yeah, I try. All right, everybody. Next week's another week, God willing. I look forward. Ruby, feel better. Feel better. Lance, take care. Everybody, Robert, listening so intently.
And I think most people were already
Elaine.
on when I said that Rav Ezra is not teaching at 11:30 today.
I think there's a whole group of rabbis who went down to Washington to isn't there a big rally, a pro Roe v. Wade, something like that?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's great. Okay. God bless you, everybody. Blessings and love. Shalom.
Thank you,
Enjoy,
Rabbi.
everyone. Roseanne, take care. Estelle and Ellen and Howard, everybody. Vivian, Graham,
Be safe and well.
take care.